Thank you very much. Ms. Madhu Sharma, the Secretary, Karnataka State Human Rights Commission. Dr. Uday P. Krishna, the General Secretary, Seshadripuram Educational Trust. Mr. M.S. Natraj, the Chairman of the Governing Council. Ms. Malika D.S., the Convener of Samta. Dr. Anuradha Roy, the Principal, Seshadripuram College. Learned members of the faculty, members of the non-teaching staff, the learned and the much-traveled participants. My dearest students, ladies and gentlemen, to say the least, it's indeed a pleasure and an honor to be with all of you on this beautiful campus this fine morning. What really excites an old judge like me is to see the young faces, and especially of the ladies who are here gathered in a large number. I always feel happy meeting children of your age, because when I look at you, I look at it as though I'm looking at my own children, my son and my daughter. And at the same time, I have the privilege of addressing those who will hold the reins of our future, of our country, if not of our planet. To begin with, I would certainly like to congratulate the college, the Karnataka State Human Rights Commission and Samta for organizing this conference on a burning topic, human rights violation in the contemporary world. The topic is more relevant today than ever before, for the violations of human rights has become more rampant today than ever before in history. Moreover, since the world has been reduced to a village, no matter where the epicenter of the violation is, its tremors are felt across the borders. Therefore, these violations impact our daily lives. A disability in the Mideast sends the petrol prices soaring, skyrocketing, and at the same time, it sends our economy in a nosespin. The influx of illegal Bangladeshis, immigrants, threatens the stability of the northeastern part of our country. Hence, we can neither afford to ignore nor be ignorant of these violations of human rights in the contemporary world. Of course, the topic is so vast that I'll find it very difficult to squeeze this topic into a 20-minute lecture. And let me confess, even a 20-minute lecture may be the violation of your human rights. To be inflicted with an old judge early in the morning, many of you may wonder what happens to your human rights of sleeping and getting up late. The history of human rights is as old as mankind. If any of you have read the Old Testament, it is said that Moses is the one who led his people, the Israelites, out of slavery from ancient Egypt. In our own mythology, it is Lord Krishna who saves his people of Mathura from the despotic king, Kansa. But the modern concept of human rights really germinates from the 18th century Europe, from the Age of Enlightenment. Taking their cues from the teachings of the ancient Greek philosophers, the political philosophers of the 18th century, people like Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, spoke about inalienable rights of the people. This was the age, if many of you may remember, when the bourgeois capitalist class was beginning to tackle the monarchy, a monarchy that claimed it had the divine right to rule over the people of France and parts of Europe. It is these political philosophers who talked about that there are certain inherent human rights which are given by nature and not necessarily by the state. Not only are these inherent in every human being, conversely, they are universal in their scope. Thus, the state can neither deprive nor touch these rights which are given to us by the Creator himself. The Americans proclaimed these rights as liberty, equality, and pursuit of happiness. The French called it liberty, equality, and fraternity. But with the genocide of the Second World War, the world woke up to the universal violation of human rights, and in December 1948, you have the birth of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. These rights are they include the right to life, to right to speech and expression, to right to freedom of religion and faith, to right of movement, to right of fair trial, and protection from slavery and from genocide. Those of you who are familiar with our Constitution would be familiar with some of these rights, as some of these rights find mention in Part 3 of the Constitution, dealing with the fundamental rights of the people and the citizen. However, with the flux of time, many other rights have now been added through different international conventions. Thus today, we have the sexual and reproductive rights of women, the children's right to be protected from physical abuse and sexual exploitation, the right of the physically challenged to realize their true potentials, the rights of the LGBT community, thus the human rights of the individual, which was guaranteed by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, now finds transformed into the rights of the communities. Therefore, the horizon of human rights is ever changing, every day, every year. But the dead letters of the law cannot protect lives. Presently, we are caught up in the throes of human rights violation all over the world. It is affecting the developed countries like United States and UK as much as it afflicts the underdeveloped countries of Asia and Africa. Of course, the less economically developed a country is, the more developed is the violation. Hence, the violation is inversely proportionate to the economic and political growth of a country. But the question is, who are the violators of human rights? Ironically, the leader of this tribe of marauders is the state itself, the state that is embedded and is committed to uphold the constitutional values. Surprisingly, it is the state that violates the human rights. Wanting to hold on to political powers, the leaders of the various countries have plunged their nation both into civil war and international conflict. Take the example of Syria. President Assad of Syria, wanting to hold on to his political power, has inflicted mind-boggling atrocities on his own people. On August 21st, 2013, the suburbs of Damascus were subjected to gas and artillery attacks, killing more than 1,000 people of Syria. The things have deteriorated to the point that millions of Syrians have left their country, their home and hearth, only to move on to Europe or to the other countries of the Middle East. As of today, Syria ranks at the top of the list of Human Rights Index, one of the most epicenters of human rights violation. Surprisingly, the state with its might uses and employs various methods for inflicting violations. On the one hand, you have the draconian laws. For example, we have the law of sedition, for which people can be arrested. And yet, on the other hand, you have the absence of the laws. For example, there is no law to arrest the atrocities being committed by the police on the sex workers. Thus, it is both the draconian laws and the absence of law. Curiously, both can be used to inflict violation of human rights. North Korea and China, of course, lead this pack. They have silenced the voices of conscience in their countries, namely the writers, the journalists, the artists. In 2011, 120,000 persons were imprisoned, starved, executed by the North Korean regime. The present president of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, is not only a threat to the human rights of his own people, most importantly, he is emerging as a threat to the world peace as he goes on to threaten that he will teach America a lesson, that he will embroil the planet Earth in a nuclear holocaust, thereby killing all our rights of all the human beings. The state also utilizes its police force, the paramilitary force, and the armed forces for oppressing its people. Take the example of Sudan. The security services in Sudan have continuously killed people in unlawful and extrajudicial killing, which is another way saying that those persons who do not deserve to die were killed. Surprising, the warring factions in Sudan has started recruiting children for their armed forces, thereby violating the human rights of the child. In the regions of Darfur, the tribes have been killed, and yet the Sudanese government has turned a blind eye to the plight of its own persons. Recently, the UN has projected if the conflict continues in Sudan, half of its 12 million people will either be dead or displaced by the end of this year. But it is not only the state, surprisingly, it is also the French groups that threaten the human rights. Take the example of United States of America today. The neo-Nazi, the white supremacist, the Ku Klux Klan claims that America is a country for the Christian and only for the white men who belong to the Anglo-Saxon race. Therefore, according to those who are either Afro-Americans or other minority communities, or are non-whites or non-Christians, they do not have the right to stay back in the United States. Curiously, this is the thought of the country, which is the country of immigrants themselves. Their president, Trump, talks about building the Great Wall of America between the borders of America and Mexico. He talks about returning what are labeled as the dreamers, the small children who have walked thousands of miles from Latin America to reach the land of the brave and freedom called the United States. Yet it is the same United States which is now speaking of remanding the people back to their original country of origin, Latin America. In Europe, you will find the same set of thoughts. Threatened by the migration from the Mideast, the European countries like France and Germany are beginning to have a second thought, whether those persons who are migrating to their countries should be permitted to stay. Interestingly, French groups are not the only ones which inflict violations of human rights. At times, tragically, it could be the majority that inflicts the violation of the rights of the minorities. Take the example of Pakistan, an Islamic republic, which inflicts and continues to inflict violations of human rights on its minorities, the Sikhs and the Hindus. Take the case of Myanmar, where the Rohingyas are being thrown out, they are being targeted in a country which professes the Buddhist religion that believes in non-violence. A country that preaches non-violence, the most violent country in the South Asian region. Because of the migration of the Rohingyas, we are facing a legal issue which is presently seized by the Honorable Supreme Court. What do you do with millions of people crossing the Indian border? As a country, do we permit them to settle and eventually to get Indian citizenship? Or, like the Americans, we turn around and tell them, please go back home. Besides the fringe groups, beside the majority, there are also the non-state actors known to all of us called the terrorists. It is these terrorists, be they the lone wolf who flies into a crowd or the suicide bomber who attacks a mosque or a bazaar, or the Taliban attack on the small children at the school, or the Mumbai terrorist attack in our own countries. Surprisingly, terrorism raises a very, very interesting human rights issue. And the issue is, once a terrorist is caught, what do we do with him? Does he have a right of a fair trial as our Constitution proclaims, or do we just hang him for having killed hundreds of people simultaneously? The public opinion, of course, is divided on this issue. The judicial opinion is uniform. Like any other person, he is entitled to a fair trial. Of course, the Americans would disagree with us on this issue, for they have their National Security Act, they have their Guantanamo Bay prisons, and according to them, a terrorist deserves no mercy. He has to be detained without even being told the charges for which he is being deprived his liberty. But the Honorable Supreme Court of the United States has come to the rescue of these very terrorists by giving them the right to file habeas corpus writs to challenge their illegal detention. Therefore, whether it is the Honorable Supreme Court of India or the Honorable Supreme Court of America, the judicial thinking is well defined. Even a terrorist has a right to a fair trial. After a long period, a new entrant has entered this hall of fame of the violators. And guess who this new entrant is? The multinational corporations. Driven by greed, obsessed with exploitation of the natural resources, unmindful of the environmental degradation, it is these multinational corporations who are displacing millions of tribes, causing industrial disasters, clearing the forest, thereby adversely affecting the ecology of the entire world. We are all well aware of what is global warming. We can not only see it, but when you see the temperature soaring, you can even feel it. And yet, the states have to take any cognizance against the multinational corporation. And the reason is rather simple. As many of you may know, the multinational corporations have a budget which is bigger than the national budgets of many of the countries. Once you grease the palm of the political parties would not take action against the multinational corporations. Closer home, the scenario of human rights violation is dark and dismal. Steeped in a hierarchical frame of mind, ingrained with the feudal ideas of inequality, every day, every hour, we Indians continue to violate the human rights of our women, our children, of our religious and sexual minority, the physically challenged and the physically imprisoned. If you read the reports of Amnesty International 2016-2017, or look at the International Index for Social Parameters, you'll find that a secular democratic republic called India ranks amongst the worst of the countries of Africa when it comes to violating the human rights. Although we are proud of a very proactive and independent judiciary, but nonetheless, we continue to commit violations of human rights with great impunity. If we are to concretize our constitutional dreams of an egalitarian society, if we are to restore the rule of law, we need fearless and dynamic lawyers, and especially law students. And this is exactly where all of you come in. You are the millennium generation. It is your generation that will be required to discuss and debate and decide on various human rights issues. And since I see a large number of ladies here, the issue is, should you have the freedom to choose your own life partners? Or because you marry an inter-community faith marriage, a high court of this country would have the power to annul your marriage in a habeas corpus petition. Should you have the right to wear the clothes of your choice, or will the clothes be dictated by the choice of the majority? Should all of us have the right to eat what we like, or rather to be dictated and determined by the government? What is the scope of the right of privacy, which only recently the Honorable Supreme Court has made it very clear that it is a fundamental right of each person and each citizen? Under what circumstances can the state intervene and violate your right of privacy? and that is what is being debated right now with regard to the Aadhaar card. The question is, should the minority be inflicted with the culture and thinking of the majority in this country, or would we give minorities the right to propagate, to have faith, to preserve their culture? And minorities need not necessarily mean only the religious minority. The word minority also includes the linguistic minorities. Only recently, the Karnataka High Court has said and directed the central government to take care and define the linguistic minorities in Karnataka. Because in Karnataka, we are lucky enough to have certain languages which are the languages of minority group. For example, the Andhraite who speak Telugu, the Maharashtrians who speak Marathi, Tullu people who speak a peculiar language, the Kurgis who have a separate language of their own. What happens to these minority linguistic communities? Do we have the right to clean air and clean water, or do we surrender our rights to the industrial barons and to the developers of Bangalore? Considering the fact that it is the industries which is polluting all the lakes of Bangalore, on which side would you stand? Would you rather talk about development or sustainable development when it comes to environmental issues? These are not only vital, but most importantly, volatile issues. But nonetheless, all of us would have to decide these things with determination and grit for the simple reason: the type of country all of us will inhabit in future is determined by how do we answer these issues of human rights. I hope this sketchy details of a large canvas would ignite your mind and your imagination and would invite you to enter into this arena called the human rights violations. My best wishes are to the participants, and my prayers are to the students and the faculty of this esteemed college. I'm certainly grateful to all of you for giving me such a patient hearing. Thank you very much.